Imagine North America more than 20,000 years ago. There are no modern cities, no highways, no skyscrapers, and no borders dividing the land into countries. Instead, vast grasslands stretch across the landscape. Enormous glaciers dominate the north, and giant ice age animals such as mammoths, mastodons, and giant bison move across the continent. Somewhere in this ancient world, human beings are walking across the land. They are hunting, gathering plants, making tools, raising children, and searching for safe places to live. But who were these people, and how did their ancestors reach the Americas long before Christopher Columbus? For a long time, archaeologists believed that the first people arrived in the Americas around 13,000 years ago. This idea became known as the Clovis first theory because distinctive stone spear points found near Clovis, New Mexico, were associated with some of the earliest widely accepted archaeological evidence of humans in North America. The traditional theory suggested that people entered North America from Asia after crossing the ancient landmass known as Beringia and then spread rapidly across the continent. But over the past several decades, archaeological discoveries have challenged the idea that Clovis represents the beginning of human history in the Americas. Today, scientists have strong evidence that people were present in North America thousands of years before the Clovis culture. One of the most extraordinary discoveries was made at White Sands in New Mexico. Beneath the modern landscape, researchers discovered ancient human footprints preserved in sediments from what was once a large ice age lake. These were not tools or broken bones that had to be interpreted. They were actual footprints left by human beings as they walked across the ancient landscape. Dating studies indicate that some of these footprints are approximately 21,000 to 23,000 years old. Independent dating methods have provided support for this age, making White Sands one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the study of the first Americans. Think about what that means. Around 23,000 years ago, much of northern North America was covered by enormous ice sheets. The world was in the middle of the last glacial maximum, one of the coldest periods of the last ice age, yet human beings were already living somewhere south of those massive glaciers. They were not standing at the edge of history waiting for civilization to begin. They were already surviving in a difficult environment, adapting to changing temperatures, finding food and water, and moving through a world filled with powerful predators and enormous ice age animals. But where did these early Americans come from? The leading scientific evidence points towards ancient populations connected to Northeast Asia. During the Ice Age, huge quantities of Earth's water were locked inside glaciers. As a result, sea levels dropped dramatically, exposing a vast region between present-day Siberia and Alaska. This region is known as Beringia. It was not simply a narrow strip of land like a modern bridge. Beringia was a huge landscape containing rivers, grasslands, animals, and vegetation. Humans could potentially move through this region over generations, following animals, searching for food, and adapting to new environments. However, the journey into the Americas was probably not one simple migration made by a single group at a single moment. Scientists continue to investigate several possible routes. One possibility is that people moved through an interior route between the great ice sheets when environmental conditions allowed it. Another possibility is that some populations traveled along the Pacific coastline. During the Ice Age, sea levels were much lower, exposing areas of land that are now underwater. People familiar with coastal environments may have used boats or followed the coastline, moving gradually southward. Unfortunately, much of the evidence for these early coastal journeys is now beneath the sea, making it extremely difficult for archaeologists to find. The archaeological evidence from South America provides another important clue. At Monte Verde, in southern Chile, researchers discovered evidence of human occupation dating to roughly 14,500 years ago. Archaeologists found remains of structures, wooden materials, stone tools, plants, and other evidence showing that people were already living thousands of miles south of North America at a very early date. If people had reached southern Chile more than 14,000 years ago, their ancestors must have entered the Americas considerably earlier. This supports the idea that humans had already been moving through the continents for a very long time. The Americas these people entered were very different from the world we know today. During the Ice Age, North America was home to an extraordinary collection of animals. Mammoths walked across the plains. Mastodons lived in forests and wetlands. Giant ground sloths moved slowly across the landscape, while enormous bison and other now extinct animals traveled in herds. Humans shared these environments with animals that would later disappear. At White Sands, researchers have found human footprints alongside tracks belonging to Ice Age animals, providing a remarkable picture of humans and megafauna occupying the same landscape. Survival in this world required knowledge and cooperation. These early people needed to understand animal behavior, recognize edible plants, find clean water, create tools, build shelters, and protect themselves from dangerous animals and harsh weather. They probably traveled in small groups and depended heavily on cooperation. Knowledge was one of their greatest advantages. A successful hunting technique, the location of a water source, the behavior of an animal, or the identity of a useful plant could mean the difference between survival and death. This knowledge could be passed from older generations to younger ones, allowing communities to adapt to new environments as they moved across the continent. Over thousands of years, human populations spread throughout North and South America. Different groups adopted to different environments. Some lived in cold northern regions, while others occupied forests, grasslands, mountains, deserts, coastlines, and tropical regions. Over time, these populations developed diverse technologies, traditions, languages, social systems, and cultures. The Americas were never home to just one culture. They became the homeland of countless indigenous peoples with their own unique histories and identities. One of the most famous early archaeological traditions is the Clovis culture. Clovis points are distinctive stone projectile points that have been found across large areas of North America. For much of the 20th century, their presence was used to support the idea that Clovis represented the first widespread human population in the Americas. But discoveries of older sites and evidence such as the White Sands footprints have changed that picture. Clovis remains extremely important to archaeology, but it is no longer considered the beginning of human presence in the Americas. There is still much that scientists do not know. And then, thousands of years later, another chapter began. In 1492, Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic and reached the Caribbean. European accounts would later describe his voyages as the discovery of the Americas. But from the perspective of human history, the continents were not unknown or empty. Indigenous peoples had already been living throughout the Americas for thousands of years. They had developed communities, trade networks, technologies, agriculture, spiritual traditions, political systems, and cultures long before Columbus arrived. The story of the first Americans is therefore not simply a story about who arrived first. It is a story about human endurance and adaptation. It is the story of people entering a vast and unfamiliar world during the Ice Age and gradually spreading across two enormous continents. They survived dramatic changes in climate, encountered extraordinary animals, developed new technologies, and created communities that would eventually become some of the most diverse indigenous cultures in human history. And perhaps the most powerful evidence of their existence is not a palace, a monument, or a written document. It is something much smaller, a footprint. At White Sands, a human being walked across the edge of an ancient lake more than 20,000 years ago. Perhaps they were traveling with their family. Perhaps they were searching for food. Perhaps they were simply crossing the landscape. They could never have imagined that their footprints would remain hidden beneath the ground for thousands of years, waiting for modern scientists to discover them. Today, those footprints provide a direct connection between our world and the distant Ice Age. They remind us that long before modern nations existed, before European ships crossed the Atlantic, and before written history recorded the events of the Americas, human beings were already here. They walked across ancient landscapes, raised families, survived difficult environments, and passed their knowledge to the next generation. The first Americans were not a single tribe, and their story was not a single journey. It was a long process of movement, survival, adaptation, and cultural development that unfolded over thousands of years. Their descendants would eventually create countless indigenous nations and civilizations across the Americas. So when we look at the history of America, perhaps the story should begin much earlier than Columbus. It begins with footprints in ancient mud. It begins with people following rivers, coastlines, animals, and changing seasons.